The night they moved in, the house felt strangely awake, as if it had opened its eyes after years of resting, listening to every footstep, every whispered word crossing its floors. I remember standing in the hallway, my hand on the railing, feeling the quiet press against my skin heavier than it had ever been before. Something in the air warned me, gently but firmly, that life inside these walls was about to change. It was late September when Michael and Alyssa arrived with 3 suitcases, a cardboard box of toiletries, and the promise that they were only staying for a few months. The sun had already slipped behind the line of pine trees outside, painting the windows in soft blue shadows. I'd spent the morning dusting the guest room, folding the sheets just right, and setting out fresh towels with that little lavender spritz I only used for special visits. My son hugged me first, quick, warm, familiar, but Alyssa's arms barely brushed my shoulders. Her perfume lingered long after she stepped away, something sharp and citrusy that didn't quite match her smile. She walked through the house slowly, her heels tapping lightly over the hardwood, her fingertips drifting along the banister like she was testing its strength. Every now and then, she paused, studying a picture frame or the corner of the living room as though she were imagining it differently. I kept telling myself she was simply settling in, trying to feel at home, trying to understand the place where her husband had grown up, but something tugged at me quietly like a thread being pulled at the edge of a sweater. Michael laughed it off later. "Mom, you're overthinking. She just likes clean lines. She notices things." But it wasn't what she noticed. It was how she noticed them. The first sign came the next morning. I walked into the living room, mug of tea warming my hands, and found Alyssa standing at the bookshelf. Not browsing, not reading titles, just staring. Her hand rested lightly on the wood, almost tenderly. She didn't hear me come in. "Alyssa?" I asked softly. She startled a quick inhale, shoulders tightening before her expression softened again. She smiled, polite and practiced. "Oh, good morning, Evelyn. You keep things so neat. It's impressive." Her tone felt like a compliment wrapped in inspection. She walked past me, fingers grazing the edge of the coffee table, then the door frame, then the wall light switch. I followed her with my eyes as she moved from room to room, stopping just long enough to make my stomach knot. Later, when Michael came downstairs, I mentioned it in the gentlest way I could. "She seems curious," I said. He shook his head with a grin. "She's just getting comfortable, Mom. It's a new space." But comfort didn't look like measuring the length of my living room with her eyes or opening drawers she didn't need to open. It didn't sound like that clipped politeness in her voice or the faint coolness that slipped between us whenever she spoke. By evening, the house felt strangely tense, as if the walls were holding their breath. Alyssa's footsteps moved upstairs, slow and steady. Michael's voice drifted behind her, trying and failing to soften the silence she left in her wake. Some silences are peaceful. This one was not. On the third day, I found her standing in the hallway again, this time touching the moulding above the baseboard. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. When she noticed me, her hand dropped quickly. "You have an interesting house," she said. The pause before the word interesting landed heavier than the word itself. "Thank you," I replied, though I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. She looked around again, her eyes scanning the hallway like she was counting something I couldn't see. Then she smiled, a small, polite curve of her mouth that never reached her eyes. "It must hold a lot of memories." The way she said it made my shoulders stiffen. Memories weren't something people studied. They were something people cherished. But Alyssa treated my home like a puzzle she was trying to solve. That night, the floorboards creaked softly under her weight as she walked the hallway long after Michael had fallen to sleep. I lay awake in my room, listening to her slow, deliberate steps. The house seemed to listen too. On the morning of the fourth day, I woke before dawn. The house was still but not restful. As I walked down the hallway, I swore I felt a faint draft, as if a door had been opened moments before. I paused, listening. Nothing. Only the quiet. Only that uneasy, watching silence. Something was shifting inside my home. Something I couldn't name yet. But I could feel it settling into the corners, waiting. And I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was Alyssa looking for within these walls? Evelyn always believed that a quiet home had its own kind of language, little creaks, soft sighs, and the gentle hum of stillness. But lately, the silence in her house felt different. It no longer comforted her. It watched her. It began with small things so minor that she almost didn't notice. A picture frame on the hallway table was slightly tilted, even though Evelyn was certain she had straightened it the day before. At first, she chalked it up to her own distraction. She had been tired, anyone could forget. But then there was the drawer in the living room, half open, out of place, and a faint rustling inside, as though someone had reached in and disturbed its contents. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment before slowly pushing it shut again. She told herself it was nothing. A home lived like its occupants, sometimes untidy, sometimes restless. But the missing key bothered her. It had hung on the hook by the back door for 20 years, never once misplaced. Not even when Michael was a teenager, always rushing out the door, always late. Evelyn kept her house orderly. She found comfort in knowing where everything belonged. But one crisp evening, after finishing the dishes, she noticed the hook was empty. The key was gone. Her pulse tightened. She checked the counter, the drawers, even her coat pockets. Nothing. A key doesn't just disappear. She called out into the house, "Michael? Alyssa?" Alyssa appeared first, stepping out of the hallway with that soft smile she always wore, sweet, polite, warm, and yet somehow sharp around the edges. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, Evelyn?" she asked gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Did you misplace something?" "The key," Evelyn said. "The one for the back door. It's missing." Alyssa tilted her head, voice dripping with concern. "Oh, Evelyn, maybe you forgot where you put it. That happens sometimes with age." The words were honeyed, kind enough on the surface, but Evelyn felt something cold behind them, something dismissive, something calculating. Before she could reply, Michael stepped into the room. His expression was neutral, tired, almost distant. He looked at the empty hook, then at Evelyn. "Maybe it fell," he offered quietly. "We'll find it." But he didn't move to help her search. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press Alyssa about whether she had seen it. He simply stood there, uncomfortable, as if caught between two worlds he didn't know how to balance. Evelyn felt her heart sink. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, strange shifts continued. A vase slightly moved from its usual spot. Papers rearranged on her desk. Lights she never turned on, glowing faintly in the evening. Small things, ordinary things, but all unsettling in their own quiet way. Each time Evelyn asked, Alyssa had the same soft, sugary response. "Oh, Evelyn, maybe you forgot." Sometimes she would even place a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder, speaking in that soothing tone used for someone fragile, someone slipping. "Don't worry, we're here for you." Her voice was warm, but her eyes were attentive, watching, measuring. Michael, on the other hand, grew increasingly silent. He would avoid the conversations, avoid meeting Evelyn's gaze. When she tried asking him privately if he noticed anything strange, he simply sighed and said he didn't want conflict. He didn't want tension. Evelyn realized then just how alone she felt in her own home. At night, the house carried new sounds, soft footsteps, a floorboard creaking down the hall. Slow, steady movement, too careful, too intentional to be casual wandering. The first time Evelyn heard it, she sat up in bed, heart pounding. She strained to listen, barely daring to breathe. There it was again. Footsteps passing her door, then fading into the corridor. She waited for Michael's door to open. It didn't. She waited for Alyssa to return to their room. No sound. Just the house breathing, alive and uneasy. Why was Alyssa awake so late? And why did she walk so quietly, like someone who didn't want to be seen? The next morning, Evelyn mentioned the footsteps casually, testing the waters. Alyssa laughed lightly. Oh dear, you must have been dreaming. But Evelyn caught the flicker of something in her daughter-in-law's expression. Recognition? Surprise? Guilt? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that her home no longer felt like hers. And the shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if something unseen was beginning to shift underneath the surface. Something she was only just starting to notice. Something she could no longer ignore. Morning sunlight used to feel warm in Evelyn's kitchen, soft, golden, comforting. But lately, even the light felt dimmer, as though the house itself sensed the tension rising within its walls. She woke earlier than usual that day, unable to ignore the gnawing unease that had been growing inside her. As she stepped quietly down the hallway, she heard it. Alyssa's voice, low and hurried, coming from the kitchen. At first, Evelyn thought she was talking to Michael, but the moment she got closer, she realized the tone was too urgent, too secretive, too wrong. Yes, I understand, Alyssa whispered sharply, but I need the ownership papers handled as soon as possible. We can't keep waiting. I want everything finalized before... Before what? Evelyn froze outside the doorway, breath caught in her chest. Ownership papers. Finalized. The words echoed in her mind like cold water dripping into a silent room. Before she could gather herself, the floor creaked beneath her foot. Alyssa stopped mid-sentence. A beat of silence followed, tense and heavy, before Alyssa suddenly changed her tone, as if flipping a switch. Yes, that's fine. We'll talk later. Thank you. The call ended with a soft click. Evelyn stepped fully into the kitchen. Alyssa stood near the counter, phone still in her hand. Her eyes widened for a split second, caught off guard, before she plastered on a bright, exaggerated smile. Oh, Evelyn, good morning. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. You're up early. Did you sleep well? The sugary tone made Evelyn's stomach twist. She moved towards the kettle, pretending calm, though suspicion pulsed in her chest. I heard you on the phone, Evelyn said gently. Is everything all right? Alyssa blinked, her smile tightening. Phone? Oh, just a routine call, nothing important. I heard something about papers, Evelyn continued. Her voice was soft, careful. She wasn't accusing, just asking. Ownership. Something being finalized. Is something going on that I should know? For a brief moment, the sweetness faded. Alyssa's eyes sharpened, just a flicker, quick enough that someone less observant might have missed it. But Evelyn saw it. A coldness, calculating and annoyed, like someone irritated at being watched too closely. Then, just as quickly, Alyssa let out a soft laugh and pressed a hand to her chest. Oh, Evelyn, you must have misheard. Honestly, you worry too much. Before Evelyn could respond, Michael entered the kitchen, hair messy, eyes tired, shoulders slumped the way they often were lately. He glanced between them, sensing tension immediately. What's going on? He asked. Alyssa stepped toward him instantly, linking her arm through his with practiced innocence. Nothing, sweetheart. Your mum is just confused. She thinks I was talking about... What was it, Evelyn? Papers. She laughed again, light but mocking. Evelyn felt heat rise to her face, not anger, but something like hurt. Michael, she said quietly, I only asked because I overheard— Mum, Michael interrupted, lifting a hand gently but firmly. Maybe you're stressing yourself out. You haven't been sleeping well. Maybe you need rest, that's all. Rest. The word hit her like a chill. It wasn't the first time he'd said it lately. It was becoming a pattern, one that made Evelyn's skin prickle. The way he said it carried an undertone she had never heard from him before, a tone that felt dismissive, final, almost rehearsed. I'm fine, she replied softly. I just want to understand. Alyssa gave her a sympathetic smile that didn't match her eyes. Of course, Evelyn. We know you mean well, but you're overthinking things. Michael nodded in agreement, not even meeting his mother's eyes. Yes, there's nothing to worry about. But Evelyn was worried. Not because she believed she was forgetting things, not truly, but because every time she tried to ask a simple question, the air shifted, the atmosphere thickened, and she was met with smiles too sweet to trust and excuses delivered too smoothly. Her gaze drifted toward a stack of unopened mail on the counter. Something about the way Alyssa subtly stepped closer to it made Evelyn's chest tighten. A thought formed in her mind, small but sharp. What papers could Alyssa possibly be talking about? And more importantly, why did she sound so desperate to get them finalized? As Michael and Alyssa moved around the kitchen, performing the motions of a normal morning, the realization settled in Evelyn's bones. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't confusion. This was the first crack in something much larger, much darker. And whatever Alyssa was planning, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. It involved her. The letter had arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where the sunlight stretched slowly across the floorboards and nothing felt out of place. Evelyn remembered placing it by her bedroom lamp, right where she always kept important mail. She even touched the envelope twice before leaving the room, reassured by its presence. It was from her bank, the familiar blue emblem in the corner, routine, unthreatening. But the next afternoon when she reached for it, the nightstand was empty. Not misplaced. Not buried under books. Simply gone. For a long moment, she just stood there with her hand hovering over the empty space, as though the letter might reappear if she stared hard enough, but the wood remained bare. A faint tremor crept through her fingers. She searched the room carefully, quietly, opening drawers she hadn't touched in weeks, checking between pages of her reading journal, even kneeling to look under the bed. Nothing. Just dust, stillness, and her own growing unease. When she stepped into the hallway, Alyssa was coming up the stairs. Her expression brightened the moment she saw Evelyn. "Oh, Evelyn," she said with a soft smile. "I was just heading to check on dinner. Everything okay?" Evelyn swallowed, keeping her voice steady. "I'm missing something. A letter from my bank. I had it by my lamp. Have you seen it?" Alyssa pressed a thoughtful finger to her lips. A letter. She tilted her head, too casual, too smooth. No, I don't think so. Maybe you misplaced it. It happens." Evelyn forced her breathing to stay slow. "I'm sure I placed it right there." Alyssa's smile sharpened just slightly, barely noticeable unless one was looking closely. "Well," she said with a shrug, "memory gets tricky sometimes, especially when we're stressed. Don't worry too much." The words were gentle, the tone, however, cut like a cold blade. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "All right. Let me know if I can help," Alyssa added, each word dipped in honey. She brushed past Evelyn down the hall, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air long after she disappeared down the stairs. Evelyn stood frozen, wondering if she had imagined the flicker of triumph in Alyssa's eyes. Later that night, the house settled into its familiar silence, the kind that made every creak sound meaningful. Michael had fallen asleep early on the couch, the hum of the television buzzing softly behind him. Alyssa was in the kitchen humming faintly, the tap running on and off. Evelyn moved slowly as though afraid of waking something hidden in the walls. She didn't know what pulled her toward the trash that night. Maybe it was instinct, maybe fear, or maybe a voice inside her whispering that answers often hide in places people never think to look. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the refrigerator's glow when she pulled the door open. She took a breath and lifted the trash lid. The smell of leftover pasta and coffee grounds rose up. She almost closed it again. Almost. Then she saw it. A torn edge of something white, almost completely buried under food scraps. Her heart dropped. With trembling fingers, she pushed aside a crumpled napkin and lifted the shredded envelope free. It was smeared with sauce, half of the bank's emblem soaked through, but unmistakable. Her letter. Her mail. Hidden in the trash. Someone had touched it, read it, thrown it away. Her throat tightened. She looked over her shoulder, listening. Alyssa's humming had stopped. The house felt suddenly alert, as if watching her every breath. She folded the ruined envelope and tucked it into her robe pocket. Panic fluttered in her chest, tapping against her ribs like a trapped bird. But she forced herself to breathe evenly. If she said anything, if she sounded even a little unsure, Alyssa would seize the moment, twist it, turn it back on her. No, not this time. She walked quietly out of the kitchen, careful not to disturb the floorboards. The house felt full of shadows, shifting, listening, waiting for her to make a wrong move. Upstairs, as she reached her doorway, she heard footsteps behind her, light, near-silent steps. A long day? Alyssa's voice floated gently up the stairs. Evelyn turned. Alyssa was smiling from the bottom step, eyes glinting in the low light. "Get some sleep," she said softly. "You look tired." The confidence in her voice was unmistakable, almost smug, as if she already knew exactly what Evelyn had found. Evelyn nodded weakly and stepped into her room, closing the door with a quiet click. She leaned against it and gripped the torn envelope in her hand. Someone wasn't just rearranging things. Someone wasn't just wandering the halls at night. Someone was trying to learn more about her finances. And the worst part? They were getting bolder. The argument began the way storms do, quiet at first, with a heaviness in the air that warns you long before the first crack of thunder. Evelyn had stepped out of her room to fold laundry in the upstairs hallway, the afternoon light settling in soft stripes across the floor. Alyssa was already there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, watching her. "Michael and I cleaned the downstairs," Alyssa said, her voice almost casual. "You should handle the upstairs. It's only fair." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I do. Every day." Alyssa's eyes flicked to the half-folded towels. "Well, maybe not well enough." The words were wrapped in sweetness, but the tone underneath scratched like something sharp. Evelyn kept folding, smoothing each towel carefully. She didn't want another argument, not after the missing letter, the nights spent listening to footsteps that shouldn't be there, the uneasy quiet that grew thicker by the hour. "I do my best," Evelyn murmured. Alyssa exhaled in an exaggerated, impatient sigh. "Your best?" "Evelyn, we're all adults here. Everyone has responsibilities." Something inside Evelyn tightened. She lifted her head. "This is my home. I've taken care of it alone for years." Alyssa's smile evaporated. Her eyes cooled, flat and watchful. "That's the problem," she said softly. "You think it's still yours." Evelyn's heart stumbled. "What do you mean by that?" Alyssa stepped closer, too close, her perfume drifting like a warning. "I mean," she whispered, "you should stop snooping in things you don't understand." Before Evelyn could answer, Alyssa reached for the small tray of folded washcloths, Evelyn's washcloths, and flicked them deliberately to the floor. The sound was soft, but the message was loud. Evelyn bent down to gather them, hands unsteady. Her breath felt thin, almost breakable. Alyssa, she said quietly, please stop. This isn't right. Alyssa's jaw tightened. What's not right is you meddling, asking questions, making accusations, acting like a victim. Evelyn shook her head. I haven't. The slap came before the sentence could finish. A single sharp crack that split the hallway open. Her cheek burned instantly, heat spreading across her skin in a wave. Her breath caught not from the pain itself but from the shock, how fast it happened, how intentional it felt. The world around her seemed to fall into a deep silence, like the house was holding its breath. Alyssa's hand slowly lowered. She didn't apologize, didn't flinch. She just stared at Evelyn with a calmness that chilled. That, Alyssa said in a low voice, is your last warning. Stay out of things you don't understand. Evelyn pressed her fingers against her cheek. The warmth pulsed beneath her skin. Her vision wavered. She felt small, like the house had shrunk around her. Alyssa, her voice trembled. Why are you doing this? Alyssa stepped back, smoothing her hair like she hadn't just struck someone. Because you keep getting in the way. Footsteps thundered up the stairs then, hurried, uneven. Michael appeared at the top landing, breathless. What's going on? He asked. Evelyn turned toward him, relief flickering in her chest. Michael, she hit me. Alyssa gasped dramatically, hand rising to her mouth. Oh my God, Evelyn, are you serious? Michael, Evelyn tried again. She's confused, Alyssa interrupted softly and stepping closer to him. She's been forgetting things, getting upset over little misunderstandings. I think she's overwhelmed. Michael's eyes moved to Evelyn, but something in them had changed. Hesitation, uncertainty, distance. Mum, he said gently, almost rehearsed, maybe you misinterpreted what happened. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her. Misinterpreted? She whispered. Michael, she hit me. Alyssa placed a hand on his arm, her touch tender, practiced. Let's not escalate things. She's tired. She needs rest. Evelyn shook her head slowly, hardly recognizing her own voice. You're choosing her over me? Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. How? Evelyn stepped back until her shoulders touched the wall. The house felt unfamiliar now, like each shadow belonged to someone else. Betrayal sank through her chest like a cold stone, heavier than the sting on her cheek. Alyssa leaned into Michael slightly, her eyes locked on Evelyn's with quiet triumph. How about you take a nap? She suggested softly. We'll handle the rest. Evelyn didn't reply. Her throat was tight, her heart unsteady. She brushed past them both, moving slowly down the hallway, one hand on the wall to steady herself. In her room, she closed the door gently, not slamming it, not shaking, just quietly closing herself off from the house that no longer felt like home. She sat on the edge of her bed, touching the warm, tender skin on her cheek. The sting would fade. The mark might disappear. But the message was clear. If Alyssa was willing to raise her hand once, what else was she willing to do now that she knew Evelyn was afraid? The morning light slipped through the curtains in thin, pale lines, soft enough to feel gentle, but not warm enough to chase away the unease that had settled in Evelyn's chest since the slap. She moved through the house slowly, her cheek still tender, though the redness had faded. She didn't touch it anymore. The pain had shifted someplace deeper. The study had always been her refuge, small, sunlit, filled with old books and the scent of pine polish. Even the air felt quieter there, as if it understood what she was carrying. She picked up a dustcloth, more for distraction than cleanliness, and began wiping the shelves. When she reached her writing desk, she paused. Her notebook, the one she used for grocery lists and small reminders, was lying open, though she knew she had closed it last night. A thin slip of white peeked from between the pages. A card. Business size, smooth, unfamiliar. Evelyn lifted it with trembling fingers. Harlan Pierce Estate Law. Property transfer, wills, beneficiary, changes. Her stomach tightened sharply. She turned the card over. On the back, in a handwriting she knew all too well, sharp, round loops with little flourishes at the ends, was a name. Ask for Mr. Kellerman. Alyssa. Her breath stopped. The room seemed to tilt, not like she was dizzy, but as if the whole house had shifted under her feet. For a moment she just stared at the ink, unable to blink. Alyssa had been inside her notebook. Alyssa had been going through her things. And now she had a lawyer's card tucked inside it, marked with her own notes. Property transfer. Beneficiary changes. Evelyn pressed her palm against the desk to steady herself. Her knees weakened. "This is my home," she whispered into the stillness. "My home." The dustcloth slipped from her other hand, falling softly to the floor. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough for the sun to shift a little across the window pane, long enough for fear to turn into something else, determination maybe, or desperation. She folded the card, tucked it into her pocket, and stepped out of the study. Michael was in the living room, scrolling through his phone. Alyssa wasn't in sight, thank God. Evelyn approached him slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Michael," she said, keeping her voice steady, "I need to talk to you." He glanced up, eyes tired. "Mum, if this is about yesterday." "It's not." She held out the card. "I found this in my notebook." He took it, eyebrows knitting. "A lawyer's card? Why do you have this?" "I don't," she said quietly. "Alyssa put it there. Look at the handwriting." Michael flipped it over, reading the name. His jaw tightened only slightly, but enough for Evelyn to notice. For a moment, hope flickered. But then he exhaled sharply and handed it back. "Mum, you're jumping to conclusions again." Her heart dropped. "Michael, she wrote her name. She left it inside my things." He shook his head. "You're twisting things. Maybe she picked it up by mistake. Maybe she was helping clean. Not everything needs to be a conspiracy." "A conspiracy," Evelyn repeated softly. "You think I'm inventing this?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "You've been under a lot of stress. Alyssa and I feel like you're creating drama out of nothing." The words hit harder than she expected, harder than the slap. He didn't look at her. Not really. His eyes kept drifting away, down to his hands, to the floor. Anywhere but her. "Michael," she said, voice shaking, "please listen to me. She's trying to take something from me, from us. I know what I saw." Michael stood abruptly. "Mum, I can't do this. I can't keep mediating. Alyssa is my wife. I need you to stop attacking her." Evelyn stared at him, feeling that distance again, the one that had started small and almost invisible, but now stretched wide enough to swallow her whole. "I'm not attacking her," she whispered. "I'm asking for help." Michael didn't answer. He walked towards the hallway, shoulders tense. He didn't even look back. When the door to their room closed behind him, the quiet was immediate and suffocating. Evelyn remained standing for several seconds, the card limp in her hand. The house around her felt wrong, like someone had rearranged the air while she wasn't looking. She returned to the study slowly, each step echoing in a house that no longer felt like it belonged to her. She sat at her small desk, resting the folded business card on the wood. The handwriting stared back at her, dark and deliberate. Alyssa wasn't hiding it anymore. She wasn't pretending. She had left this card for a reason, and Evelyn had the sinking feeling that she was running out of time. Time to get answers, time to protect her home, time to hold on to whatever was left of the son she once knew. The house creaked softly, as if something settled deeper into the walls. Maybe a warning, maybe a countdown. And Evelyn, alone in her study, wondered how much longer she could fight before everything she loved slipped through her fingers. Evelyn walked across the small patch of lawn separating her house from Mrs. Carter's. feeling the weight of every step as if she were trudging through wet sand. The morning sun sat low behind the clouds, a pale and distant smear that offered no warmth. It felt strange to leave her home, the same home that no longer felt like hers, simply because she needed to hear someone else's truth. A truth that might hurt, a truth that might free her, or a truth that might destroy everything. She knocked softly on the wooden door. It creaked open before she even finished, revealing Mrs. Carter, the elderly widow whose sharp eyes missed nothing on their quiet suburban street. She had that expression, the one that mixed concern, curiosity, and a quiet understanding that only comes from living long enough to see people repeat the same mistakes generation after generation. "Evelyn," Mrs. Carter said, her voice gentle but crisp. "I wondered when you'd come." Those words alone made Evelyn's throat tighten. She hadn't said a thing, yet somehow Mrs. Carter already understood that something inside the Davis household had cracked, and that Evelyn had finally reached the point where silence felt heavier than the truth she feared. Inside the warm, lavender-scented living room, Mrs. Carter guided her to a chair. The old woman sat upright, her back straight, her eyes focused with an attention Evelyn rarely received at home anymore. "I know things have been difficult," Mrs. Carter began carefully, "and I didn't want to interfere unless you were ready to talk." Evelyn looked down at her trembling hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. "Alyssa, she's not the girl Michael described. I feel like a stranger in my own home, and lately—" She stopped when Mrs. Carter placed a steady hand over hers. "I've seen things," the old woman said, "and I think you need to hear them." Evelyn felt the room tilt slightly, as though the floor had shifted beneath her. She braced herself. "At least 3 times in the last week," Mrs. Carter continued softly, "I've seen Alyssa get into a dark sedan parked just beyond the streetlight. Late, very late, past midnight." Evelyn's breath hitched. Midnight meetings? Alyssa, who always claimed she was running errands or taking a walk to clear her head. Suddenly, Evelyn felt her stomach twist in a way that made her feel both sick and angry. Why would Alyssa be meeting strangers at such an hour? What was she hiding so carefully that even Michael didn't see it? "She didn't look frightened," Mrs. Carter added. "She looked in control, like she knew exactly what she was doing." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The only thing worse than feeling powerless was realizing the person threatening your stability never once lost theirs. And then, as if she had been saving the hardest truth for last, Mrs. Carter spoke again, her voice low. "And I've heard the shouting too." Evelyn froze. "The nights you thought no one heard," Mrs. Carter continued, "when she raised her voice at you. I did, and I heard you trying to keep your voice steady, trying not to let it escalate." She paused, her gaze softening. "You didn't imagine any of this, Evelyn. You're not losing your mind. You're living with someone who wants you to doubt yourself." For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. The room blurred. She lifted a hand to her face, realizing too late that tears had already begun slipping down her cheeks. Being believed, genuinely, quietly believed, was something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. "She's planning something, isn't she?" Evelyn whispered. Mrs. Carter sighed. "I don't know what, but people who meet strangers in the dark usually aren't planning good things, and people who isolate others the way she's isolating you. They're after control." Evelyn swallowed hard. "So I'm not imagining it," she said again, needing the confirmation more than she realized. "No," Mrs. Carter replied firmly. "You're not. And whatever Alyssa is hiding, whoever she keeps meeting after midnight, it's something you deserve to know." Evelyn wiped her tears, her hands steadier now. A strange, quiet resolve began forming deep inside her, fragile but undeniable. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. For the first time, she felt believed. But belief came with a new question, one that echoed through her chest like a warning bell. Who were the strangers Alyssa kept meeting after midnight, and what exactly were they planning? The sunset outside was the colour of dull copper, fading too quickly into the kind of darkness that made Evelyn's house feel colder than it should. She pushed the front door open, balancing groceries against her hip, and immediately sensed it, that thin, unnatural silence that didn't belong. A silence that felt arranged, deliberate, waiting. She set the bags down slowly, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no TV humming in the background, no clatter of dishes from the kitchen, just the walls holding their breath. A faint chill crawled along her spine as she made her way toward the bedroom hallway. Halfway there, she stopped. Her bedroom door, usually shut, always shut, was wide open. Not slightly ajar. Wide. As if someone wanted her to see it the moment she turned the corner. Evelyn's heartbeat thudded painfully as she stepped forward. The air in the room felt wrong, disturbed. Her eyes darted around, analysing instinctively the curtains, the dresser, the rug, the bedspread slightly wrinkled on one side. Someone had been sitting there. Then her gaze landed on the safe. Her home safe tucked carefully beside the wardrobe, the one Michael insisted she didn't really need, the one she kept closed at all times because it held the last pieces of her life before everything changed: documents, old letters, a small amount of emergency cash, keepsakes her late husband once treasured. The safe door was hanging open. Not wide, but enough. Enough for someone to slip a hand inside. Enough for someone to look through everything she had tried to protect. Evelyn's throat tightened. She crouched down, fingers trembling as she touched the edges of the open door. She checked inside, documents were still there, envelopes neatly stacked, nothing obviously missing. But that didn't matter. It wasn't about what had been taken. It was about the message. I can enter your space any time I want. I can take what I choose when I'm ready. Her stomach twisted as she rose to her feet. A soft shuffle of footsteps. Evelyn spun around. Alyssa was standing in the doorway, too close, too sudden, as though she had been waiting for Evelyn to discover the scene. Her expression was mild, almost bored, but her eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "Oh," Alyssa said, placing a hand lightly on her chest. "Did I walk into your room by mistake? I didn't mean to leave the door open. You know how absent-minded I can be." The words were syrupy, false. Evelyn stared at her, unable to speak. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if Alyssa could hear it. The young woman stepped inside the room slowly, a fraction too confident, too aware of the effect she had. "You really should lock things," Alyssa said softly, glancing at the safe. Anyone could get in. Evelyn tried to steady her breathing. "Why were you in here, Alyssa?" Alyssa's lips curled almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, more like amusement at the question. "I told you," she answered with theatrical innocence. "I walked in by accident. The door wasn't closed all the way. Or maybe I forgot. Honestly, I don't remember." But Evelyn did. She remembered always closing her door. Always. Every night. Every morning. Her home had become a maze of vigilance because of this woman. Before she could respond, Michael's footsteps echoed from the hallway. He appeared behind Alyssa, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" he asked, tone already weary, as if he had walked into unnecessary drama. Evelyn turned towards him, desperate for once, just once, to be believed. "Michael," she said, her voice tight, "she was in our room. The safe was open. Alyssa let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. "I swear, Evelyn, you always think the worst of me. I said it was an accident." Michael rubbed his temples, glancing between them. "Alyssa, next time just stay out of our room. And Evelyn, please don't overreact. I'm tired. I just want peace, okay?" Peace. That was what he wanted, not truth, not clarity, not protection for the woman who raised him. Just peace. Even if that meant turning a blind eye to the storm brewing inside his own house. Evelyn looked at him, every word she wanted to say burning in her throat. But Alyssa stepped closer, brushing past her with silent triumph in her eyes, a victory neither of them spoke of, but both understood. Later, alone in the too-quiet room, Evelyn closed the safe, turning the lock slowly, deliberately. Her fingers hovered over the dial for a long moment. A door left open was a warning. A safe opened was a countdown. Alyssa wasn't just waiting anymore. And Evelyn realised with a sinking dread that the next move Alyssa made wouldn't be subtle at all. The rain had started just before sunrise, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the windows like the house was trying not to see what was coming. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard my name spoken in a voice that did not belong in my home. It wasn't loud, just sharp, practiced, rehearsed, the kind of voice someone uses when they've already decided how your story ends. For weeks, the air in my house had felt heavier, almost grainy, like dust that refused to settle. I had grown used to the sound of Alyssa's footsteps drifting through the rooms, even late into the night, soft as moth wings but never accidental. She moved like someone measuring, planning, preparing. Michael pretended not to notice, or maybe he truly didn't. He'd always had a way of smoothing over worry with a tired smile, as though ignoring something long enough could turn it harmless. I wanted to trust that smile the way I once did, but something in the walls told me trust was no longer enough. That morning, the house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator's hum felt paused, like the whole place was listening. As I neared the living room, I heard papers being shuffled, crisp and intentional. Then Alyssa's voice, syrupy sweet, wrapped around a lie. She just wants to make things easier for all of us, Michael. She told me she's ready to transfer ownership early, before her memory slips more. Her words hit me low in the stomach, like a hand pushing down. I pressed my palm to the wall beside me, steadying myself. My own boy, listening. I stepped into the room quietly, though my pulse felt loud enough to announce me. Michael sat on the couch, shoulders rounded, brow furrowed, staring at a thick stack of papers Alyssa had placed in his lap. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the picture of supportive concern. Too perfect, too soft. Her eyes flicked to me first, calm, confident, certain I would break the way she expected. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, surprised but not really. "We were just talking about getting everything in order for you. Michael worries about you, you know." Michael didn't look at me yet. He kept staring at the papers like they might lift the blame from his hands if he studied them long enough. "What papers?" I asked quietly. Alyssa smiled, lifting them with a little flourish. "The transfer forms. You said you'd been thinking about simplifying things. I just helped organize it." I felt the words enter me like cold water. I stepped closer, eyes scanning the pages. My signature, copied, not written. My name spelled with the little loop I only used on legal documents, and dates I never touched. Forge. All of it forged. "Alyssa," I breathed. "Where did you get these?" She shrugged lightly as though the truth was trivial. "You must have forgotten, Evelyn. Happens at your age." Michael finally looked up at me, and the look, it wasn't anger, it was doubt. Soft, hesitant, but deep enough to split something inside me. A mother learns her child's expressions like seasons, and this one I'd hoped never to see on his face. "Mom," he said carefully, "Alyssa said you talked to her about handing things over early. If you did..." "It's okay, you don't have to be embarrassed." Embarrassed. The rain pressed harder against the windows like it wanted to get in. I walked around the coffee table slowly, lowering myself into the chair across from them. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a sadness so old it felt like it had been waiting. "I never said that," I whispered. and those papers are not mine." For a moment, no one breathed. Alyssa's smile twitched, the first crack I'd seen in her armor. Then she leaned forward, voice dipping lower, sharper. "Evelyn, maybe you don't remember. It happens." I met her eyes, steady. "I remember everything." The words landed between us like a stone dropped in still water. Alyssa's face tightened. Just a second, just enough. A glimpse of the storm she'd been hiding. Michael shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. Lost. "Michael," I said softly, "I will not sign anything. Not now. Not ever." For a moment, silence stretched through the room like a long shadow. Alyssa straightened slowly, her expression cooling into something quiet and dangerous. The mask she'd worn for months slipped just enough to show the steel beneath. Michael tried to speak, but she placed a hand on his arm, firm, claiming. I stood. The floor creaked under my feet, almost bracing me. Alyssa leaned in just slightly, her voice a whisper made of glass. "If you won't give it willingly, there are other ways." I walked away before the chill in her words could settle in my bones. But as I reached the hallway, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of whatever she planned next. The front door clicked open before I had a chance to knock. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and wet pavement, though the sky outside was clear. Mrs. Carter stood there, shoulders stiff, her fingers clutching a small black folder. She didn't smile. She didn't ask to come in. She just said quietly, "You need to see this." I led her to the living room. Michael was already sitting on the edge of the couch, hands folded over his knees. The light from the window hit the hardwood in long, thin streaks, and dust floated in lazy golden lines. Everything felt too quiet. Mrs. Carter set the folder on the coffee table. Inside was a stack of papers and a USB drive. "It's all there," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried. Alyssa hovered nearby, a forced smile playing at her lips. She didn't touch anything, didn't move closer. The floor creaked beneath her weight, like it knew something had shifted. Michael took the USB with a trembling hand. I could see him measuring himself against every past suspicion, every uneasy glance he'd shared with Alyssa, and wondering how blind he had been. He didn't speak. He just pressed play. The footage filled the screen in shaky, grainy resolution. Alyssa's car parked outside our mailbox. She looked around, then slipped letters into her bag. The camera caught her face, the slight flicker of fear, the quick glance over her shoulder. And then, later, a coffee shop where she met a man with a lopsided grin, someone the police had flagged as a scam artist. They exchanged words, brief, careful. She laughed at something he said, the sound light and familiar, but it felt foreign now. Michael didn't move. His jaw worked, his hands tightened into fists. Alyssa's eyes darted between the screen and him. It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice cracked, high-pitched at the edges. But it did look like exactly what it was. "Not what it looks like." His voice was soft, but each word landed like stones in the hollow room. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at her as if she might dissolve if he looked too long. Alyssa's composure collapsed. Excuses tumbled out, unconvincing and hollow. I thought it would help. I didn't know it would go this far." She shook, a brittle laugh escaping her. She couldn't meet his eyes. Every gesture was frantic, too fast, too rehearsed. The room held its breath. Mrs. Carter stood still, arms crossed, watching quietly. The blinds cast stripes of shadow across Alyssa's face. The world seemed suspended between the clicks of the video and the silence that followed. Michael's eyes finally left the screen, resting on her for the first time in what felt like years. He saw her, really saw her. The careful charm, the practiced smiles, the way her hands moved as if shaping reality to her will. It wasn't just theft, it was deception built like a house around him, and for the first time, he understood how he had been trapped inside it. Alyssa's lips trembled. I didn't mean for... I trusted you, he said, barely above a whisper. The words weren't angry. They were soft, broken, careful, like they had to be carried gently or they would shatter completely. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant car on the street, it all felt unbearably loud. Mrs. Carter shifted, clearing her throat. No one moved. The air between us was thick, almost visible, charged with a betrayal that could not be unseen. Alyssa sank onto the edge of the couch, staring at her hands. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. The room waited, and nothing filled it. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, spilling a long, thin light across the floorboards. Michael leaned back, head against the couch, eyes fixed somewhere far away. He didn't look at Alyssa, didn't meet her gaze. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of what trust, once broken, leaves behind, a silence that hums, a stillness that watches. I poured 3 cups of coffee, 1 for each of us. None of us touched them. And in that quiet, in the spaces between words, in the small trembling gestures, it became clear. Nothing would ever feel the same again. The truth had been exposed, and now we were left with the question that couldn't be answered in a single glance or a single night. Can a family ever recover from this? The kettle whistled, but none of us moved. The door opened before anyone knocked. Mrs. Carter stepped in quietly, her coat still damp from the drizzle outside. She carried a black folder pressed to her chest, fingers tight around the edges. She didn't smile. She didn't ask permission. She just said softly, "You need to see this." Michael was already on the couch, shoulders tense, hands resting on his knees. The late afternoon sun cut thin stripes across the floor. Dust floated in golden rays, motionless. I could feel the house holding its breath. Everything felt fragile, like a glass sculpture about to shatter. Mrs. Carter set the folder on the coffee table. Inside, papers and a small USB lay neatly. "It's all there," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. Alyssa lingered nearby, fake calm, eyes darting between us and the folder. She didn't step closer, didn't try to take it. The floor creaked under her heels like it remembered every secret she'd kept. Michael took the USB, thumb shaking as he pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, ordinary yet unbearable. Alyssa's car at the mailbox. She slipped letters into her bag, checking over her shoulder. Later, a coffee shop, a man with a crooked smile waiting. They exchanged words too brief to hear, too meaningful to ignore. She laughed at something he said, but it sounded wrong, distant, like a note played out of tune. Michael's jaw worked, hands tightening around his knees. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Every suspicion he had brushed aside, every uneasy feeling collided in that quiet room. Alyssa's lips parted, searching for the excuse she had always rehearsed. It's not what it looks like, she said, her voice cracked at the edges. But it did. It looked exactly like it. Not what it looks like, Michael whispered. His voice was low, deliberate, each word pressing into the silence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her. She flinched under his gaze, and for a moment she seemed small, unmoored. Her composure shattered. Excuses spilled out, fast and hollow. I thought it would help. I didn't know it would go this far. She shook, a brittle laugh escaping. Her gestures were frantic, too quick, too rehearsed. She didn't meet his eyes, not once. The room waited. The blinds cast stripes of shadow across her face. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, golden in the fading light. The sound of the clock ticked louder than any argument. Mrs. Carter watched quietly, arms crossed, still as a stone. Michael finally looked at her, really looked. And for the first time he saw it all. The careful smiles, the charm crafted to disarm, the way her hands shaped reality. He saw the manipulation, the construction of trust and lies. He saw the house she had built around him, and realized he had been living inside it without knowing. Alyssa's lips trembled. I didn't mean for... I trusted you, he said, almost a whisper. Not angry, broken, gentle, careful, like the words might shatter if spoken too loudly. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint car on the street, the ticking clock, it all pressed in. Heavy, unforgiving. The air between us was thick, charged with betrayal. Alyssa sank onto the edge of the couch, staring at her hands. No tears, no words. The room was full of absence. Outside, the sun slipped lower, long shadows stretching across the floorboards. Michael leaned back, head resting against the couch, eyes fixed somewhere far away. He didn't look at her. The house felt empty, too large, too quiet, too aware. Let Troy. I poured 3 cups of coffee. None of us touched them. Steam curled up, swirling in the quiet air. And in that silence, in the trembling gestures and the pauses, it became clear. Nothing would feel the same. The truth had been exposed. And now, only one question hung over us, fragile and unspoken. Can a family ever recover from this? The kettle whistled. We didn't move. Stories like these are never easy to hear, but they need to be told. If you want to uncover the hidden truths, hear real voices, and witness the moments that change lives, quietly but forever, subscribe to Her Truth Matters. Every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard.